there comes a point in time when you're taking performance-enhancing drugs that the citrus bergamot is no longer beneficial, right? That there's a dose-dependent response to testosterone, and the more you take, or the more anabolic steroids you take, the more methods you need to put in place to control serum lipid levels. Vigorous Steve here. Let's discuss a couple ancillary medications that I feel every person that takes performance-enhancing drugs should have in stock at all times. At all times, guys, just for the moment, in case you need to mitigate some side effects or take care of something, you already have these ancillary medications on hand, so you don't have to frantically start searching on online pharmacies or through your local source or through the underground lab scene, right? It's already there as a preventative measure, and it's there in case you need it. Let's start with the antibiotics first, because people who take performance-enhancing drugs, a large majority of those are doing injections, right? And whether you're doing once-a-week injections, daily injections, multiple injections per day, every time you're piercing the skin, even if you're taking exclusively pharmaceutical-grade compounds, and practice the most safe and sterile injection practices. I believe I already made a video about this. You can watch that here if it's on my YouTube channel. You should have antibiotics on hand just in case. And ideally, you just let those expire. But the last thing you want is to develop an infection. Let's say you're running an underground lab that hasn't been filtered properly, is not sterile, or it's giving you terrible post-injection pain, and some inflammation, some redness, and it's hot to the touch. Now you're suspecting an infection. The antibiotics are there just in case. I would advise everybody to have Augmentin, which is Amoxicillin Gluvanate, as well as Keflex, which is Cephalexin, on standby for a duration of 2 weeks at a dose of 1,000 milligrams per day. Now, both antibiotics come in 500 milligram tablets or capsules. So if you want to bridge a period of 2 weeks, in the meantime, you might need to source more Augmentin or Keflex, right? If the infection is so severe that you need a longer course to resolve this infection, or you need to get it drained, right? You just have a stock for a 2-week duration at 1,000 milligrams Augmentin and 1,000 milligrams of Keflex. So that's 28 tablets of 500 milligrams for both different antibiotics. You have it in standby just in case. And if you practice safe injection practices, you source your pharmaceuticals to the highest quality, even though they might be a little bit expensive. The same thing will happen to you as what happened to me. You have this Keflex and Augmentin in your performance-enhancing drug drawer, and over the course of 3 to 5 years, it just expires, right? Because you didn't have a reason to use it. It's just there in case, just for a safety precaution. The last thing you want to do is to have an infection that progressively gets worse. And as you're trying to source these antibiotics, or you're trying to make an appointment with the doctor or go to a hospital, right? There's this infection gets worse and worse and worse over time. So you just have it there just in case. Another thing that most people should have just in case is an aromatase inhibitor, right? I understand that recently a lot of people don't want to run an aromatase inhibitor. They would rather use the lowest effective dose of testosterone where they can tolerate de-aromatization. So maybe that's 300 milligrams for you, maybe that's 500 milligrams, maybe only 100 milligrams of testosterone per week. Whatever dose gives you a decent amount of estrogen, that's your maximum dose of testosterone. And then a lot of people look into the other compounds on top of that, right? That might be the dihydroboldenone, or the boldenone, or the primabol, or the trenbolone. And nandrolone will obviously make the aromatization process worse. So you might still need an aromatase inhibitor or run a nandrolone-only cycle, right? Many different ways to skin the cat. I would still advise everybody to have an aromatase inhibitor on hand in case estrogen surges up, right? Just as a preventative measure. So I would lean towards Aromasin over Arimidex or letrozole. When you do your research, they will say that letrozole is a lot more potent. But again, you don't want to overshoot. And a 2.5 milligrams dose of letrozole, of course, is going to be more potent than a 1 milligram dose of Arimidex, right? It's just a dose difference. And 25 milligrams of Aromasin is pretty comparable to 1 milligrams of Aromatase. So if you were to dubious extrapolation, you would need the dose of what? 2.5 milligrams of Aromasin to get a comparable effect regarding letrozole, right? I'm sure it will not play out that way. It's just dubious extrapolation regarding the dose. I would prefer to have Aromasin on standby just in case. I have a box of Aromasin which is also close to the expiration date, because on my previous cycle I ran a combination of testosterone with Primobolan and I did not require an aromatase inhibitor. But let's say Primobolan runs out and now you only have test for 2 weeks, 4 weeks, or for whatever reason, or you want to switch to another compound, right? Aromatization might return and you might need an aromatase inhibitor just to bridge that period. So I would advise everybody to have that on hand. And if you really don't want the Aromasin in your steroid drawer, at least have some tamoxifen ready, in case you need to block the estrogen receptors in the nipple or in the lower body, or even potentiate a little bit of sexual hormone-binding globulin production, because on my blood work, my estrogen was nicely in range on the dose of 250 milligrams of test and 200 milligrams of Primo per week. But my sexual hormone-binding globulin kept declining because Primobolan is a dihydrotestosterone derivative, which will slowly lower your sexual hormone-binding globulins over time. So it might be beneficial just to run tamoxifen to raise sexual hormone-binding globulin concentrations a little bit, and then get additional anabolism through the sexual hormone-binding globulin receptor complex pathway, right? Increasing cyclic adenosine monophosphate concentrations within skeletal muscle when an androgen attaches to the sexual hormone-binding globulin, which is located within the sexual hormone-binding globulin receptor complex. So either Aromasin, my preference would be that over Aromatase or letrozole, or a tamoxifen. And if you don't like tamoxifen, okay, have another selective estrogen receptor modulator just ready, just to block estrogen receptors like a raloxifene or a tormifene, just in case you get an estrogen surge or estrogen goes up for whatever reason, right? You at least have a method to preventively block the estrogen receptors or bring serum estradiol concentrations down within favorable ranges again. Another preventative ancillary medications which I feel everybody should have is Ezetimibe, right? It's reasonably new. Leo from Leon Longevity introduced this to the fitness industry. I've been running it for a couple months now. Many of my clients have been running Ezetimibe 10 milligrams per day. I would look into that as your primary methods to control serum lipids, whether that's the total cholesterol or the HDL to LDL ratio. I feel that Ezetimibe is the most innocuous ancillary medication to help with lipid levels and cholesterol concentrations while running performance-enhancing drugs, especially performance-enhancing drugs which are very harsh and skew your HDL to LDL ratio quite severely. So in that case, the Ezetimibe is pretty much a must. But if you're doing a cruise, right, you're doing a testosterone replacement therapy, the Ezetimibe might not be required because there's many different methods to control your lipid levels. You just have the Ezetimibe on hand in case you might want to increase the dose of testosterone, or you want to sprinkle in a couple goodies on top of your TRT. So let's say you're doing the 1,000 milligrams of citrus bergamot, you're doing the daily cardio, doing fish oil with each meal, you have a very clean and healthy diet strategy, you're controlling your dietary cholesterol intake, and you're taking some fiber with each meal to promote cholesterol excretion. Let's say you get perfect lipid concentrations on that while running hormone replacement. And the Ezetimibe is there when you're ready to go from hormone replacement or a cruise back on cycle, right? Those health supplements regarding cholesterol, a garlic extract, carnitine, right? A million different ways to control your cholesterol and lipid levels. Let's say all of that works on a cruise but doesn't work on a blast or cycle. Then the Ezetimibe is there just to preventively keep your cholesterol levels and lipids within favorable parameters. And if that doesn't work, right, there's always statins or lovastatin, which is a natural statin found in red yeast rice. You'll be able to get that over the counter. Might be more sufficient in case your HDL and total cholesterol levels really go up. So there's many different avenues to explore, and obviously you'll have to look into your individual response and what you're able to source. But there comes a point in time when you're taking performance-enhancing drugs that the citrus bergamot is no longer beneficial, right? That there's a dose-dependent response to testosterone, and the more you take, or the more anabolic steroids you take, the more methods you need to put in place to control serum lipid levels. And then we need to look at the blood pressure. Now, again, we can control blood pressure with proper magnesium and electrolyte intake. We can control our blood pressure with proper breathing techniques during strenuous workouts. Water intake, right? Reducing body fat levels so the veins of the surrounding tissues actually have an opportunity to expand to prevent the blood pressure from increasing too much, right? You'll see that people who are a little bit fatter, a little bit higher body fat percentages, that they have a more difficult capability to control their blood pressure readings because the fat is actively compressing the veins in the surrounding tissue. So getting your body fat down, magnesium, right? There's many different methods to control your blood pressure. It might work up until a particular dose of performance-enhancing drugs, anabolic steroids, especially when you start dabbling with more potent anabolic androgenic steroids. And in that scenario, there might need to be a blood pressure medication in place. Now, good thing for us, a lot of the sources that we source our performance-enhancing drugs also source Cialis, which you can look into performance-enhancing drug as well. Right? Increases the pump and the vascularity and makes the workout a lot more enjoyable. It perhaps increases recovery by increases blood flow to that area that you're training. It might be a performance-enhancing drug in the bedroom as well. And of course, it regulates blood pressure as well. So that's the low-hanging fruit just to have on standby in case you messed up your sexual hormone-binding globulin levels, or you overshot your estrogen, or it's way too low, or the balance between testosterone, estradiol, and neurosteroids is completely off. At least the Cialis is there to get you through that period where you're actively trying to resolve this neurosteroid to sex hormone balance. I got a solution for that. You can watch that here, right? And the Cialis is just in place just to bridge that period while your real sex drive increases or returns. Right? The Cialis will just increase blood flow to areas. It will also manage your blood pressure, right? So if your blood pressure goes up due to oral steroids or you keep force feeding the food during the off season and your blood pressure goes up, or the climate changes and your blood pressure goes up, Cialis is there as a preventative measure to keep your blood pressure in range. A low dose of 5 milligrams is in most cases sufficient, or 5 milligrams upon waking, and an extra dose 5 milligrams before training, right, to get additional pumps. So that would probably be the lowest hanging fruit and easiest to source a method to control your blood pressure. And then if you need an angiotensin receptor blocker, I would lean towards Telmisartan, because Telmisartan has some additional benefits besides controlling blood pressure. It's a partial agonist for the PPAR gamma, so that it might have some effect or positive effect on fat loss, or at least in particular scenarios like visceral fat or non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, it might have additional overlapping benefits. Right? So if you have to control your blood pressure, you might want to go with a blood pressure medication like a Telmisartan or Tadalafil for that sense that has some additional benefits. Right? So you don't have to take one ancillary for each little thing that you want out of your performance-enhancing drug journey. Maybe a particular compound can fulfill several different roles, right? So, of course, Telmisartan is not going to be as potent as a cardarine, for example, when it comes to fat loss. But again, it overlaps and might provide additional benefit besides the blood pressure management that you're going to get from the Telmisartan, right? And again, if the Telmisartan doesn't work, for fat loss, you can always look into cardarine. And for blood pressure management, you can always look into an ACE inhibitor, right? Or another ARB like Valsartan, for example. So an ACE inhibitor would be lisinopril, ramipril, and whatever method to control your blood pressure you feel is most beneficial for you regarding your individual genetic makeup, right? I've had clients that did not respond well to Telmisartan, and they would rather run ramipril, right? And we've tried every other method to control their blood pressure accordingly. So no good response to Telmisartan, they would prefer to run ramipril. That keeps their blood pressure in range. Now, doesn't mean you have to run ramipril the entire year through. On a cruise, it might not be required, or when the temperature is lower, or you're not eating so much, or whatever else that could negatively affect your blood pressure. Ramipril might not be required. It's simply on standby in case blood pressure goes up, given the fact that every other preventative measure to modulate and improve blood pressure is already deployed. Right? So you just keep a method to keep your blood pressure in range on standby just in case. Because you don't want to let that sit, you don't want to wait, you don't want to let that progress, because it will put additional pressure on your kidneys. It might cause edema, it might cause a headache, right? If you have high blood pressure, you should address it ASAP, and having a Telmisartan or a Tadalafil or a Valsartan or a Lisinopril or a Ramipril, right, or anything else that you prefer to control your blood pressure on standby is highly advised, guys. Highly advised. Don't let high blood pressure run rampant over time, because that will do in your kidneys. And right, kidneys issues are pretty predominant in the fitness industry. So please keep something on standby just in case. And then the last group of ancillary medications that I feel most people on performance-enhancing drugs should have in stock on standby, especially for the guys that are at reasonably higher dosages of performance-enhancing drugs or on them from prolonged periods of time. Those are the beta blockers, right? At a cruise dose of testosterone, a little bit of hormone replacement or modified hormone replacement. It might not be required. Right? There might not be any left ventricle hypertrophy or heart enlargement. But at higher dosages of performance-enhancing drugs, especially in combination with growth hormone or clenbuterol, which stimulates your heart rate, it's advised to implore some sort of beta blocker to keep your heart rate down. Don't have this continuously high heart rate, and also allow your heart rate to come down a little bit faster in between sets. Depending on the situation, it might be beneficial to block the beta-1 receptor or block the beta-2 receptor, or both, right? There's many different beta blockers out there. From my personal experience and my personal preference, I would lean towards Nebivolol. I would run that on any dose of performance-enhancing drugs just to prevent heart enlargement, right? Nebivolol has been associated with positive heart remodeling. And again, anabolic androgenic steroids, most of them have been associated with negative heart remodeling. So I would want to take 5 milligrams of Nebivolol while I'm taking performance-enhancing drugs. And again, I'm doing strenuous workouts. At one point, there might be growth hormone in the picture again. So I would put the beta blocker in place just to prevent negative heart remodeling, which could be induced from performance-enhancing drugs while doing very strenuous workouts, right? Or taking stimulatory fat burners, which can increase the heart rate. And otherwise, it's good to have that on standby in case you took too much caffeine and your heart rate goes up, or you're in a very overtrained state and your cortisol levels are up and your heart rate goes up, or you took too much T3 when your heart rate goes up, or too much Clen or ephedrine, right? Or all these stimulants that can increase your heart rate. It might be best just to have a beta blocker in place, whether that's the Nebivolol, which blocks the beta-1, or propranolol, or any of the other beta blockers which are not so selective to block the beta-1 and the beta-2. Let's say your heart rate is a little bit too high because you messed up. At least you have the beta blocker in place to prevent damage to your heart, or at least calm you down a little bit, bring your heart rate down, lower the anxiety, lower this horrible feeling that you have in your chest because your heart is pounding, right? Just as a method in case you messed up your dosing. And again, dosing mistakes happen quite frequently, especially when you're taking clenbuterol, thyroid, right, in these droppers, which are very hard to dose. And even if you shake that frantically for half an hour and dose it, to the 0.01 milliliter, dosing mistakes still occur. So keep a beta blocker on hand in case your heart rate shoots up. Personally, I would prefer to run 5 milligrams of Nebivolol because I feel that it only blocks the beta-1 receptor and it has a little bit of beta-3 receptor activation, potentially lowering blood pressure, activating brown fat, resulting in a little bit of fat loss, right? Trace amounts, which then could potentially overlap with Telmisartan being a partial agonist of the PPAR gamma, resulting in a little bit of additional fat loss, right? Trace amounts, but over time, I'm sure that adds up if you're very strict with your diet. So regarding beta blockade, I would lean towards Nebivolol. From my personal experience, it did not have a negative effect on my testosterone levels, right? I did a before and after test regarding my hormone profile. I ran that while I was training insane. I did not experience a negative effect regarding training intensity. If anything, the Nebivolol improved my training intensity because it shortened the duration in between rest periods, because my heart rate came down faster. I feel that it also reduces my caloric requirement because my resting heart rate is lower, and now I need to eat less, right? Which might also be a benefit regarding non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Your caloric intake is not so high, and you're preserving more calories by keeping your heart rate down to recover and grow muscle tissue, right? So many benefits of Nebivolol over the other beta blockers, in my opinion. But again, if Nebivolol is not effective enough, right, there's always propranolol, right, or busopranolol, another beta blocker. So in my opinion, I would start with Nebivolol as my beta blocker and then explore from there if required. I would start with Telmisartan as a method to control blood pressure and then explore from there if required. Same with Ezetimibe regarding lipid concentrations and then explore from them there as required. And then I would always make sure I have an aromatase inhibitor in place, whether that's Aromasin or Tamoxifen, which also acts as an aromatase inhibitor because one of the metabolites, the norendoxafen, acts as an aromatase inhibitor. So you have a little bit of an extra overlapping effect. It might increase sexual binding globulin levels, restoring sex drive over time if you crushed your sexual binding globulin, but your estrogen is still within the normal reference range. And again, tamoxifen might also lower IGF-1 concentration, so you'll have to outweigh the good with the bad based on your own risk analysis and risk assessment. And then make sure you have some antibiotics on standby. And fingers crossed you let both of them expire because you don't need it, because you practiced safe injection practices. All right, I'll leave it at that, guys. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope this was helpful. If you're looking for the most comprehensive guides to bodybuilding pharmacology, you can find the ebooks on my website, vigoroussteve.com/shop. Personalized advice always available. You can find the rates in the consultations section. Follow me on Instagram at VigorousSteve. Vigorous crew, you guys know what to do. Much appreciated. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.